What is up? My name is Brandon Silvers, and this is my Above the Fold series where I talk to people in and around the sports media industry who are breaking the mold. My guest this episode is doing just that. The host of my favorite baseball podcast, At the Plate with Danny Foxworth, and Since We Last Spoke, where he covers a little bit of everything, all around good guy, also called the James Brown of podcasting by some. Shout out to KP because he's the hardest working man in podcasting. Just celebrated 1 year of doing this. Monk's Corner's own Danny Foxworth.
Man, pleasure to be back on, man. Seriously.
Yes.
I love stopping by.
Absolutely love to have you. And then we were just going over in the pre-show, normally I have you on to talk about all kind of stuff. You already know the drill. But today, the only difference is the subject matter is you. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. Just celebrated your 1 year podcasting anniversary. Take us back. What made you want to start a podcast in the first place?
Well, what made me start a podcast in the first place was around 2020, 2021. I was making a string of guest appearances on other people's podcasts. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback from my friends and family. Then eventually the question came, when are you going to start your own podcast? And at the time, I was content with just being the lefty coming out of the bullpen whenever they needed me. But then I started thinking about it. And then the more guest appearances I got under my belt, the bigger that itch became. And I needed to scratch it. But the problem was I didn't know what I wanted to talk about. So I gave it some thought, and it wasn't until I was on Twitter that I realized that there were other Black folks that enjoy baseball as much as I do, baseball being my first love. And so I started taking notes of all of my Twitter friends who like baseball and started taking the notes of who they rooted for and realized that they had pretty much all rooted for different teams. So the light bulb went off in my head. And I'm like, I think I might have stumbled upon something. So late 2022, actually was a guest on Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers back in September, where I laid my intentions bare of what I wanted to do with my baseball podcast. And then shortly thereafter, I just one by one, I was reaching out to everybody in their DMs saying, this is the podcast I plan on doing. And I know you're a fan of this team, and I would love to have you on to talk about the team. And everybody said, yeah, everybody was on board. And so I dropped my first episode on January 13th, 2023. Basically, the first episode was just talking about my love affair with baseball and how that love affair started, and also how I became a fan of the Texas Rangers. You know, I mean, it's a long drawn out story, but and I also talked about, my baseball playing days in Little League, where I was pretty good. I could hit the cover off the ball. I was a pretty lousy defender, and I could smoke fastballs. But once I moved to the next level and the pitcher started throwing breaking balls, that was a wrap for me. I mean, I didn't make contact on a single pitch in probably a month and a half, and went from second in the lineup down to ninth. But that was the first episode. And then I started bringing in guests. And at first I was super nervous because usually I'm on somebody else's podcast, but this one, I'm the one that's initiating the conversation. So it took a while to get my footing, but the more episodes I got under my belt with anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And it's really been a joy to do.
No, man, you are doing an incredible job. And you talked about how you started off with your first episode was a solo one, and then you started bringing the guests, and you still hit us with some solo ones every now and then you do the same with Since You Last Spoke. So I'm curious what kind of differences you see between doing the solo episodes and the ones having a guest, as far as pros and pros and cons, different challenges, and everything like that? Because I know they're very different animals when you approach them.
Yeah, with the solo episodes, I mean, you really don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. I mean, you can't really like riff or improvise with anybody else if you're doing it solo. And I remember the first solo episode I did, once I got through talking and it uploaded, and I was like, damn, I only talked for 10 minutes. Like, well, that's it felt like I was talking forever because I mean, I'm not a by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm not a very social person. But once I saw it, I was only like 10 minutes worth of material. Like, you know what? Fuck it. That's what they're gonna get.
Yep, this is it today.
Yeah.
That has been because mine are mostly, I'd say mostly solo, but that has been like the thing, like realizing, oh man, this is what 10 minutes of talking is. It felt like an hour. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh man. So that's probably something I've worked on myself is like, okay, we got to give the people something. And so
Hmm.
I think I've gotten a lot better at that, but it's tough. And I know one pro that I find because I have a ton of notes when I do the solo episodes because I don't want to miss anything else since you don't have someone to bounce back and forth with. So I think that I probably am more thorough and in depth with the solo ones, but I do prefer having a guest on because I like that back and forth, that conversation.
Yeah. 100% agree. I take a lot of copious notes as well, but I'm ultimately I'm thinking, man, this should carry me. These notes should carry me for at least 20 minutes.
Yes.
And then I look, I'm like, this did not carry me for 20 minutes. Oh well, this is what
Did,
they're gonna get. I
did the
said what I
clock
had to say.
stop?
Yeah,
Did I accidentally pause this one? No, it is people don't realize if you haven't done it, whew, that's a long, long time.
yeah.
Well, kind of along those same lines, what kind of like speed bumps did you hit as you were doing this and things that maybe surprised you that you didn't think about coming into becoming a podcaster?
Um, Honestly, it wasn't really a whole lot of speed bumps. I think it was just a lot of the anxiety slash fear of taking that first step. I think that was the biggest issue with me. But once once I hit record and I start talking, like once I get my intro in, then I'm settled down. So after that, it's pretty much smooth sailing from that point.
That's what's up. Do you still sounds like you don't, but was there a point in the beginning when you were like be nervous in the interviews talking to people? Because I definitely talking with you, the first one we did, if you go back and look, I was so nervous. That is like one of the few, might be the only episode where I have like edited in commercial breaks because I was so terrible in my mind at that interview that I was like, I got to chop this up and make it look like I know what I'm doing. And I did another one with Lauren Dreher, the women's basketball expert, Lo, the first guest on Above the Fold. And I was so nervous and I was terrible there too. But now I'm kind of getting into my own here, feeling my confidence and everything. So that doesn't happen too
Mhm.
often. But did you have a period like that too?
Yeah, gosh, honestly, the I would say the third guest I had on at the plate, which I believe it was 12 Kyle, because the previous two guests that I had on, I already have a rapport with them in real life. This was the first, I mean, we were friends over Twitter, but this was the first time actually talking to him in real life. And so it was like jumping into a double dutch rope. You talking with him and you try not to step over what he has to say and then know when to not to talk and when to interject. And it was just trying to find that delicate balance in the conversation. That was an adjustment period for me.
Especially doing it over Zoom is
Yeah.
so tricky because it feels like people know how to have conversations in person, but then like the virtual, you don't know if someone's internet is lagging or what, and there's just all kind of different things that can go wrong. But yeah, for what it's worth, it's never come through in your episodes. So congratulations to that. Any nerves you felt, they did not come through.
I appreciate that.
And being an introvert too, and getting into this, have you noticed that you are maybe less of an introvert now that you've done all these interviews? Like, has it translated over to real life for you?
Nah, I'm still introverted. I'll say what I have to say, and I don't feel like saying nothing else afterwards. But it is I do enjoy doing it because, like I said on my Podiversary episode, it's it's like a social exercise for me because it's a social exercise, but it doesn't feel like work because these are the people that I'm talking to. I'm genuinely interested in what they have to say and genuinely interested in hearing their perspective. So it's a lot less of an arduous task to hold a conversation. Whereas I'm at the bar and somebody wants to make small talk with me. I mean, honestly, I'm a Panthers fan. I don't even like having conversations with other Panthers fans because ultimately I end up annoyed. So this one, like talking on my podcast, it's like my environment is a little more controlled.
Definitely. We need more people who understand that you only have to say as much as you need to say and then keep it
Exactly.
moving. And
Yeah.
sometimes that means complete silence.
Yes.
So, so, and we're talking a lot kind of about at the plate, but you went from trying to figure out how to have a podcast and what you're going to talk about, and then all the way to dropping two podcasts with
Yeah.
At the Plate and Since We Last Spoke. So what was the motivation behind, hey, all right, I got it, and I got this idea. Let's do both at the same time, see what happens.
Well, since we last spoke, I always had a lot of like just imaginary ideas for podcast episodes. And I'm like, you know what? It's time to put theory to practice. So I was like, you know what? Why not make another podcast? And I was thinking about basically the impetus for since we last spoke was look and see what everybody else is doing and don't do that. Because that field, that is a crowded field. And especially
Yes.
in the black podcast universe. I mean, you got what a woman should do for her man,
Yep.
this, that, and
Relationship
the
advice.
third. I mean, even now, I mean, Cat Williams, he's got the internet going nuts. That's the topic du jour. I mean, you look on YouTube and all of the response videos to the Cat Williams interview. I mean, the views are at least like in the five-figure range.
Yeah.
So, people like the hot button topics, but I've made a concerted effort for it to not be current event based. I I'm more interested in hearing about other things. Like I talked about I mean, because I mean it's sometimes is people need to hear some of the stuff that I'm talking. Like I talked about my colonoscopy procedure. I did a tournament with two of my guys. We did a tournament about snack chips and French fries. I mean, the conversations and topics are varied. So I talked about, my last moments with my dying grandmother and how it's very okay to cry, but at the same time, you got to be mindful of not beating people over the head with a lot of serious stuff. So if I do a serious topic, the next episode is going to be lighthearted.
That's smart. And I really like that. And I like your subject matter because it is like the hard hitting, like the serious subjects that people need to hear, but people don't always talk about. I know you mentioned the colonoscopy one and how, hey, as a man, as a black man, you need to cry sometimes. Like
Yeah,
get it
damn
out.
right. Yes.
The dementia episode with your parents talking about the dementia in your family, that one hit home for me. Really enjoyed
Mhm.
that one. And talking about your mental health and bringing on other people to talk about their mental health stuff. But then you do have episodes where it's just cutting up and having fun.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy that balance because that is just something I've been trying to do more with this Beyond the Arc too, where I'm like, okay, if we're gonna talk about a serious issue this week, next week we need to talk about something just goofy about sports. Because
Exactly.
there's so much negativity in the world already that you might not want to come listen to me for 20, 30 minutes every week, bringing more into your ears.
Yeah,
So
the world is stressful enough. Don't need to compound that stress by constantly hitting them over the head with serious stuff.
no,
You
and
gotta break it up.
in the serious stuff you're covering, I think this is the difference for me. It's serious stuff that people don't typically talk about too.
Right.
So I think that's why it hits different. It's not just the usual, like you're saying, the current event serious stuff. It's stuff that, okay, we got to have this hard conversation this week, but next week we're going to talk about Christmas movies or whatever. And
Yes.
so you do a fantastic job with that. And along those lines with the serious subjects, the stuff that you're super open about, how are you able to be so open about this stuff that people typically aren't?
Because no, somebody's got to talk about it. And I know I'm not the only one going through the stuff that I'm going through. I mean, my situation, like my struggles aren't unique. You know, my hardships that I may have, they aren't unique. If if I can talk about that and then somebody hits me up and like they DM me, they're like, man, I'm going through the same thing, then I feel like the work wasn't in vain. Like what you said with the aforementioned dementia episode, so many people flooded my DMs talking about how they were going through a similar situation with somebody in their family and how a lot of the tips that were shared in that episode was very beneficial for them. And also going back to the colonoscopy episode, there were probably three or four different people that hit me up and they were like, I'm I have a colonoscopy scheduled in 2 weeks, and I was scared to death because I didn't know what to expect. And you listen, and me listening to your episode, and you talking about your experience, it calmed me down. I'm like, because really, it sounds bad, but honestly, you're knocked out. You don't. Well, personally, I didn't feel a thing, but if that information that I give to them to the listeners is helpful, then I feel like I did my job.
That's what's up because it's truly subject matter where, like with the mental health episodes and the dementia episode, where when you're in it, you might feel like, man, no one else has gone through this. So to have someone else being like, no, actually, I went through this. This is what it was like for me. And you've got
Hmm.
someone who, even if they aren't in your day to day, you can like relate to, like, okay, I remember this from Danny had his parents on talking about this, or okay, I'm like you said, I'm getting ready for this colonoscopy. It's gonna
Hmm.
be like this, I'm gonna be straight. So I think that there's a huge value in that. And I think that is one of my favorite things you do, along with balancing it with the fun, which we're about to do right now. What is your favorite, most fun episode you've done?
Oh my goodness. The uh the Firestarter podcast appreciation episode because they're my all-time favorite podcast. I've been rocking with them. Gosh, I've been listening to them since 2011. And it's just three dudes from DC who cut up and they talk to each other in like their textbook DC slang. Their slang is so catchy. But even when they're having fun amongst themselves, every now and then they'll have like a real talk moment, and it's like, man, they're dropping a lot of valuable information that I can use. But this they I just love their takes on they talk about sports, entertainment, and just a plethora of other subjects. And this to for them to be around this long is a testament to how great their podcast is. And a lot of my Twitter friends are also big fans. And I was like, in the back of my mind, like before I launched my podcast, one of my ideas was to do an appreciation episode for them. So I reached out on Twitter and I was like, I'm planning on doing this Firestarter appreciation episode. And if you want to be a guest, just hit me up in the DMs with your email and I'll send you the link. And it's like 10 people showed up. I was like, holy smokes. Like it, because I didn't go into it with any high expectations, but to see the heavy hitters show up, and especially seeing Rod from the Black Guy Who Tips, which is
Yes.
another one of my favorite podcasts. He showed up and was a guest, and I reached out to him because he's the biggest reason why so many of us became familiar with the podcast in the first place. So I figured it would only be right to extend that invitation to him. And he took me up on that offer. And we talked for almost 2 hours, just sharing our favorite moments, sharing, you know, things like valuable information that we learned from their podcast. And it really was a treat to see the idea come to life and how much fun it was in creating that episode and seeing that vision to completion. I was extremely proud of that.
It definitely got me to add that podcast to my rotation and also follow them on Twitter. And I'm pretty sure the Firestarter Twitter account is the one. I don't know who runs it, but I think that this is who did this tweet where they quoted a tweet of Stromile Swift, a dunk highlights,
Yeah.
and the quote was "nice dunk, sorry ass," and I just that
Yeah,
was it for me.
that's Basa. He's got that sorry gun like locked and loaded. He's quick to just label somebody as sorry.
I think
I loved it.
just hit you on like, yeah, okay, a compliment, and then boom, sorry ass took me out. I was crying. I was crying. It was so good. And it was impressive because like you said, Rod, I think he was writing for Game Theory, Bomani Jones's show on
Yeah.
HBO too. So you get him and you get all these people. What was it like coordinating an episode with all those moving parts? How difficult was it versus like a one-on-one podcast? Because I know the most I've had is 3 people. And sometimes I feel like I'm losing it with 3 people. How did you survive that? Was it any more difficult?
It wasn't as difficult as I anticipated it to be because we all had that genuine rapport over Twitter. So I think that same energy carried over into the podcast where we get our thoughts out and we laugh and we share our favorite moments. But I think everybody was cognizant of not stepping on each other's toes. So they made my job easier to to uh to do the episode.
That's
So
what's
I
up.
gotta give them credit too because they knew when to interject and they knew when to step back and let other people talk. And like I said, that made my job a whole lot easier.
That definitely does. Speaking of all the guests you get, how do you come across all these guests? Is it just Twitter,
Mhm.
Instagram, or that's what you social media?
Yeah, Twitter. Gosh, tell you, one of the guests I had on was on At the Plate. This guy, he's a musician by the name of Zoe, and I reached out to him because I'm a big fan of his music, and I heard him on a previous podcast, and he made mention that he played baseball at Western Kentucky. I was like, wait a minute. And then on top of that, I mean, he's from Detroit, so he's a Tigers fan. Initially I wanted to reach out to him to talk about the Tigers. Then when he mentioned on the previous podcast that he played baseball at Western Kentucky, I was like, oh, I definitely want to get him on now. So just out of the blue, just took a shot in the dark. I was like, hey, I'm Danny Foxworth. This is my podcast. I would love to have you on as a guest to talk about your Tigers and your college baseball days. And about 3 days later, he responds. He was like, what's up? He's like, man, I would love to come on your podcast, man. He was like, because I never get to talk about baseball. I love, baseball is my first love, but every time I'm on the podcast, I'm always talking about music. So yeah, let's set it up.
That's
And we had such a great conversation. And it's funny when I asked him, typically my last question on the 5 question segment is, what's the last thing that really made you laugh? And he says his nightly routine is he takes an edible and just watches bad Tubi movies. So what we
That'll do
do
it.
since then, we'll just like DM each other periodically, like, yo, did you see this Tubi movie? Yo, have you seen this Tubi movie? Oh, we got to talk about this Tubi movie. Matter of fact, we're already tentatively scheduled to do another podcast together. And I think we're going to incorporate some bad Tubi movies into this episode as well. So that's one that's really just been that was a I felt proud that I was able to nail that interview down.
Absolutely. And that's a hell of a nighttime routine.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Tubi movies, baseball, all these different things you cover. And I follow you on social media too. How are you able to get all of this knowledge about all these things? And why aren't you the Jeopardy replacement for Alex Trebek? Because you know everything about everything.
Man, I know absolutely the most all the stuff I know, there's like 6 trillion things that I don't know. So I don't I'd like to say that I'm at that Jeopardy host level, but I'm nowhere near that level yet.
Not quite.
I'll go look at Ken Jennings. And I'm like, man, I have no chance.
You probably better though, because if you've seen the Jeopardy contestants with the sports categories, they're
Oh, yeah.
trash. That's when
That is a very good point.
I'm like, I could clean up. If I knew there was going to be a sports category and I just waited and didn't get anything wrong and get in the negative, I think I'd have a shot just running the table right there.
Yeah.
So don't steal that strategy, anybody listening. Uh, and we've talked about the Twitter and IG, and you're very present on social media, but not to where I was like, man, we need to have an intervention with Danny. And it's like always like a genuine post. You can tell it's Danny's voice. And you also don't seem to be consumed by the negativity of social media either. How do you kind of maintain that little barrier, that firewall between, okay, I'm going to enjoy this thing in my own way, but not let it get to me?
Twitter learned me well. That's all I can say. I make it my intention. I always say, don't keep the Twitter blue check author's lights on. Because the people that make the most incendiary and foolish ass tweets tend to have a blue check attached to their handle. Now I'm like, you know what? If their lights stay on, it's not because of me. I refuse to engage in these foolish conversations.
That's what's up. Because that's something I've tried to adopt. Something similar is if I can't identify you in any way, you got like a hidden handle and you have a picture that's just a picture of something else, is not of you, then we don't need to discuss anything on Twitter.
Yep.
And especially like you're saying, if you got a blue check, we don't need to talk about anything on Twitter
At all.
So
I'm not trying to be friends with them.
Nope, that is a very good policy. Something else you're very good at is celebrating your successes. That's something I struggle with, especially posting stuff about myself on social media. How did you get to a point where it's like, okay, I'm going to celebrate myself, I'm going to promote myself, and not in a way that's like, back in the day, I remember when I was on Facebook, the club promoters would tag like 250 people every day with the flyer, not in a way like that, but like a good self-promotion where people are like, I want to celebrate this dude too. How do you do that? What is your mindset behind that? Because that's something I am slacking on.
Well, I put in the work, so I deserve to enjoy the fruits of my labor. It's plain as that. I mean, that's just doing a podcast. It's not like I just fly by the seat of my pants when I'm doing them. Especially when I have a guest on, it requires taking notes. It requires doing my due diligence with my interview, with the person I'm interviewing. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work having to go and dig and, come up with like talking points that they would think that nobody would ever bring up, but whenever I bring it up, and they're like, "How do you know about that?" Or they're like, "Man, you really been doing your homework." I'm like, "Okay, I'm doing my job," and that's the intention of whenever I have my subjects on. So it's labor intensive, but it's also a labor of love at the same time. So even though it's work, it doesn't feel like work to me. And I feel like if I'm gonna pop my shit, it has to be something worthy of shit popping. So I was like, yeah, I did that. And I did that too. And I did this one too. And these are just my little bodies of work that are out there forever. It's almost like it's like volumes of a book, so to speak. And yeah, I'm proud of those. I'm proud of those works.
I love that mindset. And you framed it just so simply that I'm going to step my game up. I'm going to celebrate because you're right. This is people make fun of people who podcast and like, oh, everyone's got a microphone, this, that, and the other.
I mean, which I get.
Yeah.
I completely understand.
But there's definitely a difference between people who just, all right, we're going to talk about Cat Williams, what he said on Club Shay Shay, and people who do what we do. And
Hmm.
you're right. If you're putting in the work, you might as well celebrate yourself, if for nothing else, because it is a leap you're taking to
Yes.
share part of yourself with the world and do this research and bring someone else in. They're sharing themselves. You might as well promote it and let people know, especially when you're doing episodes that could be helpful to someone else,
Yeah.
whether it's informing them about something or just giving them something to laugh about in their
Yeah.
day.
Bro, I almost did a damn backflip when I saw that when you landed Marcus Lattimore on your podcast. I was like, bro,
You and
dude.
me both. That was wild and just such a cool dude. That was probably the end of my nerves as an interviewer because I had just had the Lauren Dreer interview where I felt like I did terribly. And I had
Hmm.
also had the you interview where I was like, oh my gosh, I had to chop that up so bad. And so I told myself, I was like, okay, if you're going to be nervous about interviewing people, you might as well lay your cards out on the table from the jump and let them
Yeah.
know. And so he popped on the Zoom screen. Of course, I'm nervous. This is someone who I've been watching.
Yeah.
He's Marcus Lattimore. Also, I need to have Low back on, but I've been ashamed of my performance that last podcast. So that's why I haven't reached out if you're listening, Low. But it's Marcus Lattimore on the screen. And I tell him, I said, man, I'm excited and I'm nervous. And it was like just saying the words kind of took the nerves away. And he even, I think in the interview, talked about the importance of, all right, just say how you feel. Sometimes you just got to say how you feel and get it out. And that's what it is, just like shining a light on it. And then it's
Yeah.
gone. And so that was an eye-opening experience for me and something that I would not have gotten to if I hadn't been nervous talking to Danny Foxworth about the Low Gators or Lauren Dreer about her career. Like you have to go through those bumps to improve. So I'm glad I did. And it's a learning tool for me and hopefully everyone else. But whew, yeah, that Lattimore interview, just a good dude. And then
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to share it on here, but I know you called me with someone who had reached out to you the other day. So it's good to have people who celebrate your wins for you when you might not, or you just have someone who's like, man, Danny got to talk to so and so on the phone. That is incredible.
Yeah, bro. Again, you never truly know who's listening to you. You never
Never.
know. That phone call, dude, like he hit me up in the DM on Twitter and he was like, I'd love to talk to you. Here's my number. Like I'm like 10 minutes from clocking out at work. I clock out and I sit in my car and we talk for almost an hour. I was like, are you kidding me? This is
That's a
really
big hit.
happening.
I'm looking forward to that episode when that one
Yes.
comes, because I know you
Yes.
got a lot on the way. Man, this has been a good one. I think we'll end it here because we cover so much. I feel like this is informative. So let us know if you haven't listened to Danny. I don't know why you're here, and I'm gonna come fight you. But if you haven't yet, Danny, where can we find you, your stuff, everything? Plug and promote away, my friend.
All right. Well, you can find my two podcasts. I do a baseball podcast called At the Plate with Danny Foxworth, and I do another podcast called Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. You'll find a little bit of everything in terms of subject matter. We talk about anxiety. We do a snack chips tournament. We did a fast food French fries tournament. We talk about dementia. We had a real world cast members tournament episode. I mean, we talked about anxiety. I had a guy on who did a 10-year bid in federal prison and turned his life around and became a very successful HVAC guy. Honestly, that's probably my favorite episode that I've ever done because I got so much great feedback from that. But please just plug into those podcasts, like, download, and subscribe. They're available on every single streaming platform. And you can find the videos of my episodes on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. You can follow me at Danny Foxworth 843. Again, At the Plate with Danny Foxworth, Since We Last Spoke with Danny Foxworth. You can follow me on IG at Danny Foxworth 843. You can follow me on Twitter because I refuse to call it X. It's
Amen.
still Twitter because Elon's a jerk. But that's
Amen.
another story for another day. You can follow me on Twitter at Danny. It's FOXWRTH 843. It's only one O in the last name. And that's where y'all can find me. Rock
Boom. That's going to be in the show notes as well. Even if you think you might not be interested in something Danny's talking about on Since We Last Spoke in particular, listen to it because you just had someone on, y'all were talking about wrestling. And I had to text you about this because I was like, I'm not a huge wrestling fan. The way y'all were talking about wrestling and breaking it down and were enthusiastic and like really getting it down to like a science. I was locked into the wrestling talk more than I was locked into the basketball talk you had the same episode.
Really?
So yeah, I was like, oh, I never thought about it like that. I was like, oh, just plotting it out. Like, okay, so this is what this means. How can I use this in my own storytelling? Just y'all had me locked in.
Wow,
so even if you see
that.
Yeah. So even if you see an episode and you're like, I don't have the time today, I'm going to go ahead and skip this one. Check it out because Danny's going to make it interesting and entertaining. You're going to learn something. You're going to have fun listening to it. Danny, man, I appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you having me.
Yes,
Seriously.
sir. Please subscribe to his stuff. Also, if you're not subscribed to my stuff, go ahead and do that as well. And share it, rate it, review it. Yes, please do it. We're demanding you support us and be on the lookout for me on social media as I step my social media game up. This has been Above the Fold, the series that is a part of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Y'all have a great week, and I will talk to y'all later.